So, it continues. Hello there! Welcome back to the Writing Advice Q&A. Today, I have a weird video for you. It's actually not that weird. It's just a really silly thing that happened, and I thought I would just take this as a great chance because, as I've said in the past, I take questions from the comments down below, and probably the silliest username I've seen in a long time left two rather smallish questions, so I just thought, you know what, I'm gonna grab them together right now, because thank you, super high school level potato, for sending in the following questions. Before I go on anywhere though, I want to let you know two things. First is that the following is merely just my advice, my opinion, and what works for me. Don't take it as gospel, instead take it as the ramblings of a silly person who looks a little bit like this. And thing number two, this video is going to be a little bit short. If you missed the previous video, I'm really busy this week, so short videos instead of no videos at all. Now, user super high school level potato. I showed Kitty that username and she just lost it. That's a great username. I'm not saying you should change your username so that I can answer your questions, because as a matter of fact, I picked other questions from users who just had like their regular names. That's fine. I just thought this was funny, and those two questions were actually rather questions I haven't answered in forever, so I thought I would feature them. Consider this the middle point in a Venn diagram between you made Max laugh and you sent two very interesting questions. Now, what are those questions? Let's take it from the top. The first one goes a little bit like this. Max, what is the ideal story length? Quick questions and quick answers, because ideal story length is a bit of an iffy subject. I think the quickest answer I can give you: the ideal length for your story is the ideal length for that story. Aside from the reality of what kind of project you're working on, such as flash fiction, a short story, a novel, a novelette, a novella, those kind of have like standard word count length. But even then, like, there's still some leeway, and people could argue that like really the difference between a novella and a novel is just all kind of arbitrary, and it is, so it doesn't really matter. What I want you to keep in mind is this, okay? When I'm writing, I try not to think too much about the length of the novel, because at the end of the day, my goal is just to make the best story that I possibly can, and I find that when it comes to this conversation of ideal book length, because the advice that I've seen online, it always boils down to like two situations. Either A, your story is too short, and you have to add more to the story. Or B, your story is too long and you have to cut a bunch of it out. And I think that both of those pieces of advice, and especially the advice that just gives you like a hard page number, I think that sort of advice overlooks the fact that your story is its own story, and you can't just judge it based on like a metric. I think you have to look at your story and go, is this satisfying? Has it reached its conclusion? Because I think we've all been there. I think we've all been in that situation in which you read a book or a story, and you know the point where the story was supposed to end, and then it keeps going, and it keeps going. And I'm like, what? Did you want to exactly hit 250 pages? And I'm like, I would have been fine with this story being 150 pages if it didn't mean I had to read 100 pages of fluff. Like, I feel there are only a few things in writing that are worse than wasting the reader's time. So, for me, when I sit down to write a novel, I kind of plan what I think is gonna happen. I give myself a nice structure. It always goes long. My stories always go long, but that's fine, because ultimately, my job here, as the writer, is just to tell the best story that I possibly can, and later revise it to be even better. So I don't really come in with like a goal of like, this story is gonna be exactly 50,000 words. Not really. There's also the reality that if you're shooting for a particular kind of publishing deal, or this is really more involved if you're going traditional, I guess you could be looking at the word count / page count of the other novels that would be on the bookshelf alongside yours. That's an idea, but even then, like, that feels a little bit artificial, because like if you miss it or if you overshoot it, are you gonna cut something meaningful, or are you gonna add a scene of filler just so that you hit that exact like word page count? I don't know. I don't know, I really don't like to think about stuff like that. Primarily because the act of writing is already hard as it is, that, like, for the first draft, I try not to think about any of these sort of things. The story will be as long as it needs to, and as someone who's been doing this for a while, I can tell you, books always go long. In my experience, they always go long. If during the outlining phase, I'm like, I think this story may go this here or that. I think it may be 40k. About 40k words. Max thought to themselves, knowing they would be absolutely wrong later on. It's just the reality of things. I'm always wrong about this stuff, because the story is kind of this organic thing. It just changes as you write it, and it goes long. It seldom goes short. It always goes long. In my experience, it always goes long. So, in regards to ideal book length, I don't think there is such thing, and I would not want it to be. I think, there's been novellas that have stolen my heart, as well as 500-page tomes that also stole my heart. The length is not really an issue. As long as the story is engaging and the reader is enjoying it, they'll keep following through because they want to know what's going to happen, or they care about the characters, or both. And in that case, then it doesn't matter how long it is. So, just write it, just see where it goes, trust in the story, and follow through. Now, on to the second question. Super high school level potato asked, in regards to writing the right storytelling for the right audience. And I find that this is another of those situations in which it's something that you could worry about later during the revision process, but during the act of writing, it does not matter at all. The only audience that matters is... Okay, let me rewind for 2 seconds because I'm already like 3 steps ahead. Audience is in regards to the people who are most likely to purchase your book. Now, maybe I'm a weird person. Okay, I'm a weird person, but for me, I've never really considered myself a fan of a genre. I've always like taken pride in just being able to read whatever people give me or whatever books I stumble upon, regardless of the genre. I just want to experience good stories. That's all I want. So, from my point of view, I've never really like stopped to consider. I'm like, what would people who are interested in supernatural stories want out of this book? I don't really do that, because for me it's always just like, this is the story I'm making, and I'm kind of unapologetic about that, because I'm like, I'm not trying to sell you the story you've seen before. I'm just telling the story that I wanted to write, and here it is. Especially because I'm an independent author, so I have the freedom of having to be able to do that. The only audience that I think really matters is what age group you are shooting for, or rather, what age group you are not shooting for, and it generally boils down to young adult or adult. It's pretty much a nice split right there. Do you want this book to be read by younger people, or just everyone? And there is a difference in that particular scenario, because you do have to make adjustments depending on what kind of age group you're shooting for. If you're writing for a much younger audience, then you do definitely have to tone down several elements, as well as make changes to the writing. But I think that if you are writing a book for children, then you will most definitely already be thinking in that mindset. And I think that although someone could tell you that, yes, young adult books have to be a certain way, I would almost argue that that's, like, not true, because I remember growing up and reading books that were young adult that had a lot of adult themes in them, or that had, like, no adult themes whatsoever. Like, it was all varied, almost as though there was no rules ever. So, like, the idea that, like, young adult books have to be, like, PG-13, that I never experienced that growing up, because I read some books that had a bunch of, like, violence and sex in them, and that were literally, like, labeled young adult in them. Oh man, okay, real talk, okay? Slow down, everybody, real talk. I just spent, like, 10 minutes doing a huge rant on, like, the books I read in high school. You know, like, that one little library that your English teacher has, and it's like, hey, pick a book from this shelf and read it. And I went on like a 10-minute tirade. So you know what? I think I'm gonna make a companion video to this one, talking about the crappy books, the crappy books I read during my sophomore year in high school. I can pinpoint exactly the year it was. So you know what? I think I'll make a companion video. But that's another video for later. Let's go back and talk about audience. In regards to thinking about your audience, there's one more thing that like I feel a lot of people miss, and it's this, okay? If you're going to be an independent author, by which I mean that you're gonna self-publish your works, I think that aside from thinking about age groups, you pretty much can just do whatever you want. That's why I really like being indie, because I can just write whatever I want, and if people like it, they'll pick it up. And it also enables people to pick things that otherwise they wouldn't. Now, if you're thinking of being a traditionally published author, by which I mean that you send your manuscript to an agent, and then the agent tries to sell it to several publishing houses. In which case, I think that this situation is even less of an issue, because either A, you're gonna prepare the manuscript exclusively for a particular genre or audience group, and you're gonna sell it to the agent, in which case the agent goes, yes, I can sell this, or no, I can't sell this, fix this, or fix that. And then the agent is gonna sell it to one of the publishing houses, and if they like it the way it is, they'll just take it, and if not, they'll probably hire an editor and request that you make changes to particular things to fit the particular audience they want to sell it for. So what I'm getting at is that if you plan to be traditionally published, you are already going to be thinking about this, you have already thought about this, and even if you haven't and you've made adjustments, it's most likely that your agent and then the publishing house will request changes. Because stuff like that happens all the time, because the thing that you have to keep in mind is that these groups want to sell the product. So they have to, at that point, really focus down on, like, audience groups and genres and stuff that I just find endlessly boring, and I rather just spend more time writing books instead. And I'm not really just bashing on traditional, it's just not my thing. So, now, let's rewind, because I spent 10 minutes rambling, and I spent a little bit more rambling, so let's just rewind for a minute. Should you worry about your target audience? I think that if you are in the act of writing your story right now, you should probably worry about other stuffs. There is nothing you cannot fix. There is no story that cannot be fixed or salvaged to fit a particular audience group in regards to ages. And a part of me, I don't want to give you the advice of like shooting for a particular audience, because from my point of view, I hate pandering. I despise when I can tell that a book, a movie, a show is pandering to a particular audience, or pandering to what they think I am, or what they think, or what audience they think I'm a part of, and I can't stand that. I can't stand that. It feels cheap, and it feels external to the story. It doesn't feel like, oh, this thing happens naturally in the story. It feels more like nudge, nudge, wiggle, wiggle. Hey there, you like this stuff? Wouldn't you like this other thing too? Or like, hey, we know what you like, and I'm just like, no. But anyhow, I rambled on for way too long. I hope that these answers were helpful, and one thing! Oh darn, I forgot to mention something. Okay, alright, time to welcome back to Let's Get Meta with Max. Before someone proposes this argument in the comments, because I know it's coming. But Max, shouldn't books of a particular genre be a particular way? What about the people who do identify themselves as fans of fantasy? Shouldn't your book should to follow on certain elements as to make this audience the happiest with the book? And while I do think that you're making a particular point, theoretical person that I just made for this argument, I don't like that piece of advice, because I don't like the idea of there being molds or templates. Because if there was a way to write for an audience, then everyone would use that, and that would be the most boring way of writing stories. And I just like writing weird stories, or I like writing stories that are not conventional, and or because that sounds really pretentious, I just like to write the story that comes to me. To me, there is no higher literary sin than looking at the story you're writing, at the story that wants to be its own thing, and forcing it to be something else. That sucks. I hate that. I like just giving these stories form as they come to me. But anyhow, that slightly pretentious meta comment out of the way, I really do hope these answers helped, and if anything, I hope that they gave you another point of view. Thank you for tagging along. As always, I take questions from the comments down below, and as we're rolling into the formal outro, I want to let you know that on the screen, there are some social links. You can follow me on other platforms, and in the description down below, there are several important links, like my book recommendations, and a link to how to plan a novel, my 1-hour workshop. Over 45k views on YouTube. That's pretty crazy for a novel planning guide. And of course, if you enjoyed this video and you enjoy my silly content, please consider treating me to a cup of coffee. One-time donation, link in the description down below. And now, we're in the formal outro. Let's do this up here. Writing advice playlist, over 200 writing advice videos. Up here, a silly button you can click on to subscribe. Over here, a link to my Patreon. And over on this corner over here is my other channel with my best friend Kitty, where we review anime, we play games, and we are relatively silly people. Thank you for tagging along. Thank you for spending a little bit of your day with me. And I hope to see you on the next one.